I think there's 3 fundamental ways that you can look at Agile in an organization. And those 3 ways are kind of like through a system lens, through a practices lens, and through a culture lens. And the one that I like to start here, because it seems like it's the place that everybody wants to start, is Agile is a cultural shift. That is true, right? But here's the interesting thing. This is my favorite questions to ask when I go into user groups. As I say, if you could flip the switch and get everybody on board tomorrow, what would you have them do differently than they're doing today? They stopped fighting you, they stopped asking for dashboards, they stopped asking for audit controls and compliance or whatever, but now you want it to work. What would you go do? Right? You take culture out of the equation, and now you're like, okay, like how would I deliver something on time? Like how would I make and meet a commitment? How would I do any of this stuff? Right? And so I think culture feels like the problem because a lot of what we bring to our leadership creates a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance for them. And if we can't resolve that cognitive dissonance, what happens is they go, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I got a lot of employees. They come to me and they'll say something. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense based upon my understanding of how our business runs. Like, I hear you. Like, I hear why you think that's important, right? I want to listen to you, but it makes no sense to me. So if somebody's like operating in a world where there are legit deadlines, there's investors, there's things that have to be done, there's market cycles that have to be hit, there's integrations that have to occur, right? All these different things, and you're just like, well, just trust me, and we're just going to do the best we can, and you just have to empower me, and we're going to push all, like at some point you have to bridge that gap, right? And so to me, the culture problem is actually a manifestation of cognitive dissonance, where what you're asking doesn't close the gap for people intellectually most times. Okay? And so the hypothesis is if I could just get people to change their minds, everything else would click into place. Okay, so let's suspend disbelief. Everybody changes their minds. What are the mechanisms by which it would now click into place? Do you have a plan? I don't think most people do. Okay? The other one that I see quite a bit is the idea of a practices first. I have to like double check. Okay, cool. This is like a brand new clicker for me. I actually bought it 3 years ago and then didn't use it for 3 years. And so like, no, I don't know exactly sure how it works. So, okay, cool. So the next thing is like practices first transformation. So the idea behind a practices first transformation is that if I change the process you follow, I change the cadences that you do, the way you build your artifacts, right, all that kind of stuff, then what will happen is that by changing the practices, it will expose the dysfunction in your system, and then like the Scrum Master comes along and fixes it or something like that. I grew up in financial services, and we were dealing with 50-year-old, at the time, legacy mainframes. Anybody ever worked on top of a legacy mainframe COBOL platform? Right? Or anything, right? Yeah, some tightly integrated, poorly architected, like whatever, right? And you say, okay, I'm gonna put a Scrum team on top of that mess. Okay, and you're gonna say, the team's just gonna do the best they can, they're gonna coordinate all their dependencies, they're gonna do all these things, they're gonna operate off backlogs, and they're gonna produce a working tested increment every sprint. Nope, they're not gonna, right? Because there's no way to deploy, there's no way to validate, everything's too tangled up. Okay, so what do you do when you form that Scrum team? Let's say it's even a perfect Scrum team. 6 to 8 people, has a Scrum Master, has a product owner, beautiful backlogs, can't produce that working tested increment. You guys do a retrospective, and the team decides, well, you know, we have dependencies. We're too tightly coupled. Kind of no shit, right? You kind of knew that going in. Okay, so what do you do with that? That's an impediment that is critical to your success. Removing is critical to your success, that is unable to be resolved by direct action of that team. They might not even have permission to carve out that piece of the code and put it in the cloud or do whatever, create a service around it or what have you, right? Do the product extraction work, right? And so you just know going in that there's no way Scrum's gonna work in that environment. So what starts to happen is you start to do the practices of Scrum. People like it because they're collaborating and they're making their decisions and all this kind of stuff, and there's good communication, and so it feels good, but it doesn't actually help me get to backlog, teams, working tested software, right? There's no validation at the end of the sprint. There's no measure of progress. There's no idea of when we're going to be done. The third part that I want to hit is a systems first approach. And so I'll go a little bit deeper, and I have to be really careful on these talks. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm selling stuff up here, right? But it's like the approach is that you have to understand in the organization what it is that you want to organize around, and then you build the constructs, the process methodology and such around that. And then in the presence of dependencies, and this is going to be a big topic we can't barely do justice to today, you have to orchestrate the hell out of the dependencies. And that's something that most Agile methodologies do not specify. SAFe does a little bit. Less tends to kind of downplay it. Scrum of Scrums, that's not going to happen, right? And so what you have to do is you have to organize for the organization that you want, the system design that you want, and then aggressively start to do the product extraction work and the breaking of dependencies over time. Now, obviously, you don't have to do that. And you might be sitting here going like, well, I don't have the ability to go make anybody do that, right? But the reality is that it must be true, right? So somebody in the organization has to go build the case that if we don't get the encapsulation around the teams that we need, we're going to be forever mired in orchestration. And orchestration, just think project management, right? We're going to be, and that's why you guys get project managed in the face of Agile, because there's no ability for that team to get to a definition of done at the end of the sprint. Okay? What is that? Well, so I'll give you like a little example. So the question was, does it break down the cognitive dissonance? When we go into an early stage transformation, typically the people that are like sit in the architect's chairs, the architecture kinds of roles, tend to be the most resistant until you explain to them what does it mean to organize around the architecture, what does it mean to organize around services, what do you do with dependencies, all those things. And once you can communicate a path to somebody that actually makes sense, we're going to form teams, we're going to do Scrum, we're going to orchestrate dependencies across teams, and then we're going to start to do the product extraction work, get the service encapsulated, and then once it's encapsulated, it can start to operate like a standard Scrum team. Like that makes sense to people. They can read it, right? They can see it. Okay? So when you start to think about the idea of systems and practices and culture, they all work together. But my belief is that when you start with culture, mindset, behavior, things like that, people don't know what to go do with it. And so they want to change their mind, but that cognitive dissonance, that incongruence with the rest of their world is too great to overcome, okay? If you start with practices and you don't have teams formed right, or you don't have the right culture, then that's gonna fall apart too, because the practices were designed to work in an organizational architecture that doesn't exist. So what our belief about transformation is that you start with system design, you enable the system design with practices, you let the system design and the practices help evolve the culture, you explicitly manage dependencies until you can break dependencies. But breaking dependencies is the work of the transformation. Getting the organizational design in place is the work of the transformation. Changing people's minds and changing people's process is not the work of the transformation. That actually you almost get for free once you get the organizational design stuff right.